Good afternoon, everybody. This is Todd Obert, President and CEO of Productive Corporation. I'm joined here beside me with a microscope and a magnifying glass because he is going to get deep into Active Directory. That man is Pete Greco, our VP of Sales and Technology. Today we're going to talk about 5 ways to improve Active Directory security. But before we get in that, we have a couple things to cover. First is meeting productive in 1 minute or less. Then it is scaring the pants off you guys about what is happening in Active Directory, then bringing it all back together and giving you some great stuff to work on. So that is how we do it. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. If you are coming back, welcome back. Here's how we do it. We try to present a lot of relevant content and answer questions along the way. So if you do have a question, utilize the chat feature and let me know, and we will get your question answered to the best of our abilities. So with that, let's buckle up and meet Productive in 1 minute or less. Who is Productive Corporation, you say? Well, thank you for asking. I am so glad you silently asked. Productive Corporation provides security solutions for mid-size companies. We also have a 6-armed man that offers specialized expertise to answer licensing and technical questions. We implement, test, and optimize the products that we sell. We also offer security assessments. We do a lot of work around Active Directory security services, as well as configuration assistance of UTM and endpoint products. We also produce a lot of third-party content for you on our website, on the web. You can find this at productivecorp.com/content or our YouTube channel. The bottom line is we have a lot of resources to help you, whether it's implementation, assessment, licensing, optimization services, or just knowledge. That's why we are here. We're here to help. Help at productivecorp.com, 800-726-4099. So one of the ways that we help is we talk about poignant topics that we are hearing from our customers that we are seeing in the marketplace today. That's all about Active Directory, right? Founded a long time ago, starting in 1999, in fact. And so it's been around. And because it's been around for a long time, it's functional, but there are also some issues that some of you may know or not know that exist just due to the longevity of the product. So the man with the plan that'll be talking to you about that today is Mr. Pete Greco. Pete is our VP of Sales and Technology and has been in the security technology business for, almost 2 decades. Has done a lot, has seen a lot, has laughed, has cried a lot, because that's what happens when you're in the security business. So with that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Pete. And Pete, let's have a warm virtual round of applause for Mr. Pete Greco. Pete? Pete decided that now is the time he wants to chime in after the applause dies down. Pete?
Thanks so much. Hello, everybody, and thank you for jumping on with us today. We are going to get through this hopefully as quick as we can so that everybody can get back on with their holiday shopping and lunchtime activities. So what are we talking about here, right? It is dating back to 1999, right? And as Todd put on here, you might remember some fun things like the Melissa virus. That was a good one. Followed up by SQL Slammer, right? Lots of Y2K conversations. I remember writing many a letter stating that different products were Y2K compliant or were not. the Intel Pentium 3. I remember wanting one of those so badly. Right, and of course, the reason that we're here, because I was still stuck with my 486DX, right, and the reason that we're here today is to talk about Active Directory, right, just getting released, and I think a lot of folks agreed back then that they liked it a whole lot better than that inactive directory, right, and so it was brand new, and here we are in 2016, soon to be 2017, and a lot is still the same, right? And so the original version, a little bit of a different screen look and feel. I miss the 16-bit colors, that's for sure. It takes you back to your Mario days almost, right? Everybody was running this on physical servers. These things were saving you a lot of money compared to running a Unix network. So a lot of folks did not mind spending the ginormous cost for disk and RAM, right? And a totally different feel to the network back then. A lot more complexity has evolved over this last nearly 20 years now. So let's talk a little bit about why we're even doing this presentation, right? We've been talking to a lot of folks lately who are nervous or have already been compromised through some kind of credential type situation, which is obviously managed by Active Directory. And one of the big things to be worried about here, right, is somebody does get legitimate access to the directory through a user, or can compromise your AD server through another way, and are able to create their own super user credentials, right? They're basically going to be able to control the entire network. And the tricky thing here is it is so easy to hide information in the directory structure, where it's not that you would never find it, but it could possibly take you forever to find it. And if you do get a major hack or a major exposure point, the only way to really be 100% sure that you've gotten rid of every last trace of that intruder would be to completely rebuild the domain. And if you're not aware, I'm going to tell you right now, that is not easy to do. Right? We're actually working with someone on a project just like that, and the time-consuming nature of just migrating profiles over can be completely ridiculous. Right? So how do we get to a point where we are exposed, where our AD structure has become weaker or has become out of control? You know, a lot of it stems from AD structures being handed down from generation to generation, right? And we hear this a lot. I've been here for a year. I'm still trying to get a handle on how the backup product is working, how our endpoint security product is working, why we created the gateway policies the way that we have them, right? And then you're trying to get on top of Active Directory and figure out what's going on there. So much to do, so little time, and a lot of times folks might be getting some kind of a nice transfer of duties from someone who's getting promoted. That's a little bit more helpful, but a lot of times you're jumping into this thing cold, and the person who maybe was managing this previously is completely out of the picture and not able to communicate with them or ask them questions or find out why things got done the way they got done. And in many situations, even that predecessor does not know why this stuff got set up this way, right? So one of the ways where we really fool ourselves, and when I say we, I mean me, right, is everything is working. You know, and when I say everything is working, everybody's able to get the connectivity they need. Everybody's able to get the access that they need. When they show up in the morning, they're logging in, right, and being able to go to the internet and being able to go to their whatever map drive and hit the CRM and this kind of stuff. And it gives us the ability to snooze figuring out where our problems are. right? Because we're running to solve the problems for things that are clearly not working. Why can't I access that drive? When I enter my password here, I'm not getting logged in. Those are going to be the first problems we solve, right? And so now we have folks moving from group to group, getting extended permissions as their roles change, which is creating a weaker environment for us. And this last bullet that Todd threw on here is potentially one of the most telling things for most environments, right, is temporary changes become permanent. And I've been guilty of this myself, where we're increasing access, trying to solve a problem. We're making a lot of changes in a lot of different places, trying to figure out why something's not working. And once we solve the problem, maybe we don't know or can't remember all the different things that we did. We're not entirely sure which of the things we did actually got it working, or we jump to the next fire with the intention of coming back to this after lunch, or when I get in first thing in the morning, or I'll do it later tonight from home, and life and business gets in the way.
Yeah, I mean, or you just go, right, I mean, you say even more, it's working now, okay, so let's wait a few weeks, right, and then over a few weeks, other stuff happens, right, not even that you're, I mean, it's just, right, so all of the above.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think from the bulk of the folks that we work with, the last thing that I would ever say is that it's due to laziness. It's definitely too much other stuff happening simultaneously, and it becomes something on the task list that maybe never gets addressed. And when it does, might not recall all the stuff that you did or can't find that original document. So, right, the sky is falling. So what do? Well, first of all, it's not falling. You're still up and running, right? So as we put in here, less hype, please. Let's be realistic about what's going on, and take a look at some tips to getting on top of your AD, right? So a lot of good stuff in here. This is as we were putting this list together. These were kind of the quick 5 things we could come up with depending on your environment, right? There might be other things that you need to get focused on, and hopefully you're doing all of this stuff or doing a lot of this stuff already, right? So to kick it off, no individual permissions. And I think a lot of folks, if they're building a new directory or they're modernizing their servers to 2012, and they're really doing a big review, this is one of the big things that they should be trying to get on top of, is really getting permissions given to groups so that it's much easier to manage who has access to what and control that group structure, versus trying to figure out based on the individuals who has access to what and how do we keep control on limiting that access, right? Then we also want to make sure that we're really making sure we need all of those groups, because the more groups we create, the more stuff that is for us to be aware of and to be thinking about. And as you get larger and larger, those groups are going to grow, but even as you get to be huge, you still want to be able to keep control over the number of groups that you're creating and the permissions that you're giving access to, and doing a periodic audit to figure out where you're at there. And then, of course, this is, I honestly don't know if this is a no-brainer. We're talking to a lot of folks about least privilege access as a concept. I think when we do that, we do see a lot of people in agreement and really on the same page and understanding what we're talking about, but really trying to figure out how do we give the least amount of access that permits somebody to get their job done, right, in an environment. And we see in the larger organizations that is executed, I think, a little bit more with more intent. I think in the smaller organizations, a lot of times the thought process is because we trust everybody, we're not as concerned about the access that they have. We know Sheila is not going to be going to the finance server because that's not her job, and she's been a loyal employee for a long time. And that's one way to think about it, but what happens if Sheila's credentials get compromised? And now those credentials have access to it. And that's where you kind of, especially when you're talking to non-technical management, the way you really got to help them understand is it's not that we're worried about Sheila, it's we're worried about Sheila's credentials. And if somebody else gets those, they're now going to have access to everything, and they are not trustworthy. Right, so let's move on to tip number 2, doing the reviews and the audits to figure out who does have access to what should they have access to, and really being able to identify and create the roles that match the permissions, so that you can actually get the folks with just enough access to do their job. That goes back to that least privileged access, right? That's how we do that. And when you're creating a brand new AD, right, that's pretty easy to get off on the right foot. When you're working on a directory structure like ours that's been around for 15 years, right, a little bit more work because we've had a lot of folks come and go over that time. We've had a lot of different kinds of roles. There was a lot of access and things that we did in 2004 and 2005 and 2006 that we don't do today, but some of those groups and permissions might still be hanging around. So we need to get an understanding of what that stuff is, and make sure that we're limiting it, disabling it, deleting it, and correcting it so that we can have a much safer situation. And part of that obviously extends to the thing that scares me the most, service accounts, right? And I understand why they're needed, obviously. You've got all kinds of stuff communicating over the network, needs to get access so that it can connect with a SQL database, be able to send out alerts to admins or process owners or whatever it might be, right? But every time you see these service accounts, it's not clear always what they go to, or are they still needed? And we were looking at some service accounts that we had just yesterday as we were getting ready for this, and we saw a whole bunch of accounts that we finally identified were different versions. They were created because of different versions and then different installs on different servers, a lot of which we didn't have anymore. And I think for a long time, we were really looking at those and trying to identify, are any of these still needed? And do we have the time to figure out if we're causing a problem for ourselves if we disable this? And so we took the leap, we got the problem solved, took a little bit of time, and that's, I think, part of the reason why we get so out of whack with our directory structure is having the time to actually solve some of these problems versus knowing, hey, I'm just going to let this service account roll. Might not be needed, but if it is needed, I'm not going to stop a business process when I really don't have time to figure out what's going on. And the next thing that we really need to look at is when we install something that creates a service account for us in somewhat of an automated fashion, what kind of access is it given? A lot of the software publishers, they're putting things in with full access because it lowers the amount of folks who are going to call in for technical support, right? So when they're building these software products, whether it's a CRM or some kind of email system or some kind of security tool or business productivity tool or whatever it is, they're trying to figure out, how does this work in every environment? How do we make this thing so that it's as easy as possible and gets you up and running on the technology and gives you that quick ROI? And a lot of times what they're not thinking about is, how do I make this as secure as possible, unless maybe what you're buying is actually a security product, right? But a lot of folks are just trying to figure out, how do I make this work in most environments? And the challenge that we run into there is, now you've got a service account that potentially has an exploit affiliated with that program, where they're able to come in and leverage that service account and start owning your environment that way. So doing a review of those and figuring out how do we set those permissions in the most correct place, and which of these services are no longer in use. Here's an app that we ran from 2003 to 2008. Well, let's delete that one. That's not needed anymore, right? And then your big challenge is what do we do with legacy stuff? We have a legacy CRM product that I think next year will finally blow it away, but we've needed to keep the service account around, even though the virtual guest that's installed in is completely shut off unless we need it for something. We'll fire it up, get the data that we need, and then close it back down. But the service account remains active. Right, so that's a lot of weird stuff that we see in our environment. I know you folks see it in your environment. That makes it tricky to stay on top of. But that's why they call this work and not play. So tip number 4 here, clean up licensing. A lot of times, and this is what one of our senior techs here, Jane, says is worst case scenario, you get those identities cleaned up, and you're going to potentially save yourself some licensing costs of figuring out where I need less CALs and need less licenses for things. And if you've got a cleaner, tighter directory, you're going to be able to get a little cleaner information about how many users you have and how many users need access to what, and some of that good kind of stuff. And you got to make sure that you're documenting everything that you're doing so that you have a good policy to make sure you know what's getting changed, make sure you know who needs access to what, as Jane puts it, document, document, document. Or the other thing she likes to say is make sure you're writing yourself a term paper so you know what's going on. Right, and then tip number 5, auditing sensitive folders. And this is where we really see a lot of exposure, and it stems from AD, though you're witnessing it on that file server or shared drives or map drives, however you want to look at it, where folks are getting added as an individual, and this kind of goes back to tip 1 of no individual access or individual rights. Individuals get added to certain kinds of groups. They now have access that gets forgotten about. As their role changes, that access never gets taken away, and periodically we got to go through and make sure that all that stuff is tight. The way that a lot of folks have really tried to improve their security is through file and folder encryption, right? So we're encrypting these file shares. We're doing full disk encryption on our laptops. That's kind of a no-brainer there, right? But now we're doing file and folder encryption, and we're telling folks, hey, put your sensitive docs here, but if we're not controlling who actually has access to those encrypted areas, again, a credential hack, and now you've got someone with legitimate access to a place where you didn't want them to have access at all, or where access was not required for them to do their job, able to get in there and get that data decrypted, and can lead to data theft. So improving that, if someone's hacking into that server, or someone comes in and grabs that thing and runs out with it, they're not going to be able to access that drive, but if they're able to get that credential, they're getting all the information that person had access to. The next thing they're going to be trying to do is escalate those privileges, right? And that becomes a whole different angle. The next thing that we need to think about then is how do we make sure that we're getting the data in the right place? And that's a whole other webinar that everybody can be looking forward to seeing in 2017. Okay?
Yeah.
So some good resources to know. Before we had Jane Tyler here, who is an Active Directory mastermind, I had to go out and just figure out how to do stuff by looking it up on the internet. And so a lot of great resources out there. Productive Corporation would like to be one of those resources for you, and let you all have access to Jane and the rest of our tech team to help you guys do some of this auditing and cleanup and process implementation, right, and really figure out what's going on. But a lot of great sites out here as well that I like taking advantage of, and obviously a lot of this stuff goes back to the main source, the owners of Active Directory, Microsoft. A lot of great information there. I think what a lot of folks have found value in is they figure out what needs to be done, and then let us come in and help you do it, even as a staff augmentation type situation. I think a lot of folks have found to be beneficial. We have a handout for
You're getting right
go
to
ahead.
it. I stepped on your line. No, I'll go. So there's a handout called AD Help Links Docs Word format in honor of Microsoft. Has some of our top links that we use and have utilized for information gathering about AD. So feel free to download that. You should see it in the right hand of your of the presentation here. With that, I have a quick question for Pete. What tools are we selling to monitor or maintain Active Directory? And that's primarily for auditing and maintenance.
Yeah. Think I'm going to cover the whole thing. We would, if you're looking for a product for monitoring, seeing those permissions in a high level way, and even being able to do some remediation, the product to take a look at would be StealthBits. Would love to have an individual conversation, and we can do a custom demo so you can kind of see how that tool looks and operates. Before we did that, what we like to do is really have a needs analysis conversation. Takes really sub 30 minutes. A lot of times it's even quicker to figure out what makes the most sense for you and come up with a game plan for investigation. And then from that investigation, we can figure out what's a great way to go to help shore up your environment based on your specific needs.
Yep, exactly. So so let us know. So yeah, so you got that resource doc there. Yeah, anything else? Final thoughts, Pete?
No. Would definitely be interested in chatting further with anybody who's interested. Your productive rep will be following up with you after the presentation today. Active Directory security is one of the many things that we do, as you saw from our Meet Productive in 1 minute. Very interested in chatting with everybody to find out a little bit more about what's going on in your environment and see if we can give you some solid advice or help you out.
Yeah, and what's the kind of the play? I mean, we get somebody on. I mean, we're willing to chat with them for. I mean, this isn't just we're calling them and pitching them. I mean, we're talking and doing some, real kind of understanding what they have going on, right? I mean, how long does that initial call take, and what kind of benefit would any of these guys get from that?
Yeah, so it's different for every environment, but an initial call typically is sub 30 minutes for us to really kind of figure out what's going on, what you're worried about, what you're trying to solve, and figure out what kinds of suggestions we can make. And a lot of these conversations is we're giving you some information that you can run back and do yourself. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing for clients, Todd, is not things that they can't do themselves.
Yep.
A lot of times it's they simply don't have the time and the bandwidth to do it.
Yep.
Right? And when you bring in somebody like a Jane Tyler or a Steve Gitto here who is focused on this, right? They've already done the research for you, and they can come in and really just hit the ground running, keep you in the loop. Obviously, a lot of the stuff that we do around Active Directory and kind of the higher level security, a little bit different from kind of endpoint protection or gateway protection, really requires access and some understanding of what were you trying to accomplish here, or what does this do for you, or why do you guys think you need it this way, so that we can help you understand how to do it in a smarter way. But a lot of times we need that input from you so that we can understand what the reasons were, because sometimes we come in and see something and say, hey, this is not how I would do it, but there's actually an excellent reason for why that's the only way to do it for this specific environment. Right, so it's very interactive, and like I said, an initial investigative call, sub 30 minutes, a lot of times sub 20 minutes, and we can kind of figure out what's a plan to create a plan. That sounds kind of crazy, I know, but a lot of times that's what we're doing, is we're creating a plan that allows us to help you create a plan so that you can see exactly what we think needs to happen and give you a framework for how to go about doing that.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks, Pete. I mean, engage with us, right? We'll get you involved with our subject matter experts, and we will roll from there. So we're at the bottom of the hour. I really appreciate everybody taking the time today. We know from working with you guys how much you have on your plate. So the fact that you spent 30 minutes with us is much appreciated. I say thank you. I'm Todd Obert, along with Pete Greco from Productive, wishing you a fantastic balance of your day and week, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Thanks, everybody.